While this article is not exactly a scathing indictment against Amazon's Rings of Power, when you have even Forbes coming out and saying, hey, you know that main character we're supposed to be rooting for? Yeah, we have a problem with her. You know you're starting to fuck up royally. Hello, this is Mara Jade, and I'm back with another video, and like this article indicates, Forbes has a problem with Rings of Power's Galadriel. Now, what problem exactly is that? Well, let's just dive right into this article, shall we? In the third episode of Rings of Power, Galadriel finally smiles. Finally smiles. It's a radically expressive change for a character who, unfortunately, has virtually no emotional range. This in-name only Galadriel pretty much is a bitch. That's about the extent of her fucking emotional range. She is a bitch. A Karen. Pretty fucking much. Most often when we see her. In just the first 3 fucking episodes. So, lack of emotional range, I could pretty much stomach. It'd be boredom. It'd be fucking boredom, but I could pretty much stomach. When you have her being so completely unlikable, yeah, then we have an issue. Galadriel wears almost exclusively various shades of scowl. Perhaps the occasional glower or puzzlement, but mostly she just frowns and glares at people, either in gritty determination or impatience and frustration. I think many of the criticisms leveled at this version, it should be the version of Galadriel, but yet the showrunners lied to fans for several years, claiming they had the rights to adapting the Silmarillion and so forth, the actual histories of the Second Age, so it should be the version of Galadriel, but this is in name only, but that's not the point of this article. Have missed the mark. She is not a Mary Sue, as some have claimed. She's far too unlikable to be a Mary Sue, for one thing. Even Forbes is fucking saying she's unlikable. And her character is much too old and experienced to qualify. Mary Sues, by definition, are characters who are good at everything despite not having the training or experience required for such mastery. Okay, to play devil's advocate here, I will agree to an extent with the author, because, like I said, she's not likable. She's not even likable to any, or at least some of the other characters, pretty much. So not everyone likes her character. Alright? So, by that extent of the definition, yes, she's not a Mary Sue. However, when in the first fucking episode, you have her dispatch a snow troll in under 10 fucking seconds by herself, jumping off a sword and being flung by said sword by another elf towards the snow troll, yeah, you're swan diving over into Mary Sue territory at that point. You're literally swan diving into that territory. And they only have down to go from this point with their character. But at any rate, let's just move on. If you're not clear on what a Mary Sue is, I discussed the concept in the video below. Well, we're not going to watch that. I also don't care that she's portrayed as a warrior and has skill with a sword. Sure, we don't see that in The Lord of the Rings, but by then, she's close to 10,000 years old, give or take. She's fought against Morgoth and Sauron. It stands to reason she's picked up some skills with the blade and probably a bunch of other weapons. She's a level 200 high elf. She's a multi-classed to the gills. Alright, tell me you haven't read any of the Second Age histories without telling me you haven't read any of the Second Age histories. Pretty fucking much. You're pretty much saying the gist of that paragraph is we don't know a lot about Galadriel's backstory, so it stands to reason per my lack of knowledge of the character that she may have picked up a sword a time or two in the several thousand years age that she's supposed to be. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility, and yet we have works like the Silmarillion, the Unfinished Tales, and the Histories of Middle-earth pretty much stating the complete fucking opposite in terms of Galadriel's character. She has no need to pick up a sword at this fucking point in her life. Not only does she have no need to pick up a fucking sword at this point in her life, because she's literally powerful enough to make people's gaze avert her. Alright? To fight a necromancer by the time she reaches the hobbits with just her innate power alone. She doesn't need to pick up a fucking sword. But she's also been with Celeborn from the end of the First Age, and yet he is mysteriously missing. We're at a point now in the Second Age timeline where their Celebrimbor, in name only, is coming up with a forge, most likely to inevitably leading to creating the Rings of Power. So we know approximately when this is supposed to be taking place per fucking that. So she's been with Celeborn for well over 1,000 years, probably going on 2,000 years at this point, pretty much. But where is he? So we know where Galadriel is, how she is, and so forth. Unfortunately, in Rings of Power, it appears Galadriel has not picked up any people skills despite being several thousand years old at this point. She shows up in Numenor, rescued by Elendil and brought safely to the island nation, with her hackles up, combatively abrasive for no apparent reason. Yes, I pointed that out. No apparent fucking reason. Alright? No apparent reason. And she demands a ship. In so many words. Demands a ship. And if I were Tarmuriel, and I'm talking about the in-name only version in the series, if I were she, I'd be like, bitch, swim. You're not getting a ship. She's an elder of an immortal race born in Valinor, one of the few beings left who lived through the First Age and saw the two trees. And yet she acts like a perpetual teenager, so much so that Elendil actually tells her she reminds him of his children. She's supposed to be several thousand years older than Elendil. I'm not sure how old Elendil is supposed to be. Well, the timeline is so fucked up at this point, I have no idea how old he's supposed to be. But Elendil and his sons, because he has no daughters, sons live to be pretty fucking old by human standards. And he's pretty well into his age at this point. His people live for hundreds of years, but he's not close as to as old or wise as Galadriel, and yet here he is, clucking at her like a doting father. After 3 episodes, I also have to sadly admit that I think the casting choice here was a mistake. I like most of the cast at this point, but Galadriel is a weak link, and while I'm sure Morfydd Clark is a fine actor, she just isn't convincing as Galadriel. Sure, much of this is in the writing, and maybe if her character were written better, I wouldn't notice as much, but she just doesn't come across as a believable Galadriel to me at all, even a younger, brasher version. With Galadriel set up as the show's primary protagonist and 5 seasons planned, I admit I'm starting to worry. There is much to love about Rings of Power, and the 3rd episode had plenty that I enjoyed, but I'm really concerned that Galadriel will sink the ship if major changes aren't made to her character. And it might simply be too late for that, which is a shame. Once again, a massively expensive, beautifully shot TV show is slipping because despite all that money, the writing quality just isn't there. Now, if you like the Rings of Power, Godspeed, more power to you. All right? I'm not gonna sit here and not admit I don't question your judgment in that sense, or if you claim to be a fan of Tolkien, question that. However, if you're a normie and you enjoy the show, whatever. But I and others are still going to call out the lore breaking, the poor storytelling, and so forth for this series. And even here, pointing out the poor writing. Pointing out how poor the writing is. First 3 episodes in. You shouldn't be noticing the poor writing, but you're noticing it. I'm still enjoying Rings of Power, and the massive campaign against it is silly and largely manufactured by people who made up their minds long before it ever came out. Well, Eric, we, as you put it, made up our minds, alright, after discovering we had been lied to for several years by the showrunners and Amazon Studios as to what rights they had to Tolkien's works. They had no rights to any of the histories of the Second Age and are just adapting the appendices, which are about this fucking much in pages, and trying to flesh that out into 5 seasons when you have the showrunners saying that they're telling the story Tolkien never wrote, when you're having the producers saying that they want this Middle-earth to reflect the world we are living in now, not Middle-earth as it is, when you have the blatant tokenization casting for certain characters, the non-canonical additions of characters, and then the attacks against fans who are criticizing the series of racism, sexism, what have you, when we're criticizing the lore breaking, the tokenization, and so forth. So yeah, we kind of made up our fucking minds at this point, Eric. And that's not covering every fucking little thing that's led up to the series premiere. So yes, we made up our fucking minds. Lamentations that it is somehow overly woke or agenda-driven are clearly contrived and enormously nonsensical. Yeah. Race swapping. Making Galadriel not only, I'm not saying she shouldn't be the main protagonist, but borderline Mary Sue and a Karen. That's not, agenda-driven? Race swapping characters, that's not overly woke. And then throwing out accusations of racism against people who are criticizing what they're doing to certain characters, when in fact there is diversity in Middle-earth, and if they wanted to at all reflect that honestly, there's plenty of races, plenty of subsets of humans, races of dwarves, and so forth that would have been reflective of that diversity, but no, you picked member berries. Put characters where they shouldn't belong, and then attack the fans. But that doesn't mean there aren't legitimate problems with the show, and Galadriel, unfortunately, is one of them. Hopefully that changes. P.S. No, I'm not suggesting that Galadriel smile more. Yeah, you went there unironically. I only brought up her moment of smiling because the slow motion scene was so jarring. Galadriel is always very stony-faced in this show, and then suddenly we have this agonizingly long shot of her grinning ear to pointy ear. Now, I equated her, again, to those vampires from 30 Days and Nights, whenever she smiles, per her teeth. But that's just me. That's what made it jarring for me. I think the problem is more about how they've written her to be so headstrong and brash that she lacks other basic social skills like diplomacy, patience, and so forth that could make her feel like a more well-rounded and convincing character. Then suddenly in slow-mo they give us this. By this point, Galadriel has the fucking skills like diplomacy and patience and so forth. But they give us this. Alright, here's an update. Most of the responses I've seen to this piece have been positive, and anecdotally at least, the general response of fans of Galadriel online seems in line with my own. I think the coming weeks will determine a lot about fans' views on the character, but at the moment she definitely is falling into the strong female protagonist trap that has doomed many of other modern characters. I wrote about this with She-Hulk, though I think they took a different approach to writing that character. In the Disney Plus show, She-Hulk, aka Jennifer Walters, is actually quite charming and fun. She's a very likable lead, and her fourth wall breaking asides are fun and entertaining. The problem that show runs into is that it feels the need to constantly make the men around She-Hulk caricatures of sexist and misogynistic men. Naturally, there are many sexists out there, but by hammering us over the head with the fact audiences start to feel preached to, which isn't the greatest feeling when you're hoping to enjoy a story. This guy's talking out of both sides of his mouth at this point. Ultimately, this diminishes She-Hulk's character, making her appear strong only because the men around her are so awful. One even refers to a woman as it at one point, which is quite a lot more egregious than even the very sexist phrases I've heard from other men. This is very much like making the heroes smart by making all the other characters around them very stupid. Instead of making viewers think, oh, this character is so clever, we think, oh, the writers must think we're stupid also. But the way Galadriel is being handled is not the same, even if the writers fall into a similar trap. The men around Galadriel are not made to look bad so that she can look good. Indeed, characters like Halbrand and Elendil come off pretty well by comparison. Both seem reasonable and cool-headed in comparison. Even the overly cautious Gil-galad and Elrond at least seem patient and calm compared to the overly emotional and constantly angry Galadriel. Here, Galadriel is presented as a strong female protagonist trope, her strength only equal to her bristling anger. The writers seem to think that the more she bristles and the more she acts tough, the stronger she'll appear, going so far as to have her pull a knife on Elendil. Which Galadriel would never fucking do. Unfortunately, this just gives Galadriel the same traits as toxic males, and not the kind of tough guys we actually like to watch like Aragorn, but rather the boastful, impatient, and often abusive men who we slot into the antagonist category. Positioning Galadriel as a headstrong, younger, more warrior-like elf could have worked fine had she been given some of her more admirable qualities, as well as such as wisdom and grace and the innate power that makes simply being in her presence an otherworldly experience. She should not remind Elendil of his children. She should make him equal parts in awe and afraid, simply to be in proximity with the creature so beyond anyone he's ever encountered. Sure, you wouldn't have to turn the dial up that high, but elves are supposed to be exotic. Right now, only Arondir comes across as non-human. He's the one elf in the show with an ethereal presence. Not quite, but in comparison to Galadriel. Galadriel's strength should stem from her wisdom and command, not just her ability to make demands and act tough, all bark and no bite. Even the troll scene could have been handled better with her making a display of her leadership skills rather than showing off some goofy acrobatics that feel out of place in Tolkien's work, and more in line with the worst excesses of the Hobbit trilogy. I made a video about this also. Please watch blah blah blah. Alright. Well, you have an article that pretty much author talks out of both sides of his mouth, but at the same time, when even you have Forbes fucking coming out and calling Amazon out, at least in this regard, and saying, hey, your main protagonist, short of calling her a bitch, we have a problem with her. And he's telling Amazon, hey, you're falling into that strong female protagonist trope, the strong whammon trope that Hollywood oft puts women into because they think displays of brashness, anger, and so forth is akin to strength, and it's not. It's fucking not. But anyway, what are your thoughts about this article? Let me know down in the comments below. Do you agree with this article? Do you disagree with this article? If you're watching Rings of Power, what are your thoughts? I'm watching it and giving my honest takes and honest breakdowns. So, if you want to check those out, I put the spoiler-free review out once I finish the episode on Friday. I put that out, and then I go into a spoiler breakdown the next day, Saturday, about 4 p.m. Eastern or so. So look for that if you want to get my honest take on the series. So far, lore breaking aside, and I'm not ignoring that, but lore breaking aside, the biggest sin this show has so far, we're 3 episodes in, is sheer fucking boredom, and I shouldn't feel indifferent when it comes to Middle-earth and its characters, but that's what this show made me, pretty much fucking indifferent at this point. But, at any rate, I'm going to still push through this series. We've got 5 more to go, so, say a prayer for me pretty much as I push through along with others who are watching this series. But at any rate, let me know all that fun stuff down in the comments below. I will be live later on Twitch tonight for some Destiny 2, about 7:30 p.m. Eastern on my Twitch, Jade_Fire. I'll be re-uploading live streams to my live channel. I have yet to be able to do that because life got in the way, but I should have them up by hopefully no later than Thursday. To include a spoiler breakdown for Season 5 of Cobra Kai, I'll be doing on my main channel, this channel, tomorrow evening at 8 p.m. Eastern in place of the Cringe Factory that I do normally every Wednesday. So tune in for that if you love Cobra Kai, or even if you just like it and you want to hear people give their honest takes on the seasons so far, come check that out. 8 p.m. Eastern, like I said. Like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. This is Mara Jade, catch you on the dark side, and by the power of the uterus, this is Rings of Power's Galadriel.